As we examine Budget 2024, my name is Mervyn Williams. With me is Mr. Elson Lowe, Economic Advisor to the Leader of the Opposition. We are discussing Budget 2024, which is now being read by the Minister for Finance, Dr. Ashley Singh. He has been at it for more than 3 hours now. And the only surprise is his demeanor, the way he's presenting himself. But that apart, no surprises. Heavy, this budget 2024 is heavy on public infrastructure as we anticipated, and we know where that is leading us. Public infrastructure projects have been identified by the parliamentary opposition as the vehicle for the furtherance of corruption. Elson.
Absolutely. We're seeing in excess of $200 billion for roads and bridges, which is a significant increase over last year's, a little bit over $130 billion. What we're also seeing on the flip side, the other side of that, is that education spending has still lagged behind public infrastructure spending. And of course, a large component of that education spending will be another form of infrastructure when it is schools and so on.
Exactly.
But even then, you're seeing a number far below $135 billion for education. So we're spending less on education than roads and bridges. It seems to me that education is just as important as roads and bridges, but I guess that's not the government's take. That's the first thing to note. But as we dive in a bit to the education figures, so far, unless there's some sort of a change, we're looking at no free UG this year. I don't know if that was a bluff that the government was trying to come with, because the funding that would have been required to make the University of Guyana free has not been specified. There could be a change, but as it stands, the funding that would have been there to make the University of Guyana free has not been specified. The University of Guyana's subvention has been increased marginally from over $3 billion to just over $4 billion. In order to make the University of Guyana free, we're expecting to see more of a $10 billion figure. Of course, we've said the university needs even more than that to be invested in it for research and for other forms of funding.
I'm sure if the government in its wisdom had appropriated the $4 billion that it has identified for gold scholarships to the University of Guyana, free education would have been available to citizens of this country in 2024.
Absolutely. So we've got an allocation for gold that is really almost exactly the same as the allocation for the University of Guyana. Now, of course, there are some gold courses that may be useful, but it seems to me that it is beyond belief to think that the gold program would be as important to the country as the University of Guyana, which, of course, has had thousands produced thousands of graduates who are employed across Guyanese society and is really central to moving Guyana's business environment, businesses forward. So this is really, I think, alarming. But one of the things that we're looking for, which is highly unlikely at this point, is the government. You may recall the president saying to the UN that the government would spend 20% of the national budget on education. It's not looking like that is going to be what we're going to see at all in here today. Rather, it looks like a bit of a shortfall. So let's see how the budget pans out. But right now, it's looking like education is taking a bit of a hit in favor of more focus on infrastructure and potentially corruption.
Well, in the education sector, the bunch of the money is going to construction of schools. And again, in the realm of public infrastructure project, in the realm of the shrinkage, in the realm of putting money in the pockets of the rich, and denying really revenues, much needed revenues in the direction of training of our teaching staff, in the area of providing a living wage for teachers, among other public servants. So the question is, are we going to get real value out of this enormous infrastructure vote in that subsector?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we pointed out at the beginning of the program, it is important not just to spend money, but to have outcomes. We've not heard the Minister of Finance speak about educational outcomes, really, in terms of quality of performance, almost at all. And the one or two areas where he's spoken about training outcomes have left questions to be asked. We heard the minister speak about 2,000 nurses. But of course, if the nurses are not adequately compensated, one of the questions raised in the course of his remarks is, are we training nurses for export? Now, we want Guyanese to have the best opportunities, but we need to provide them with the appropriate compensation so that they are comfortable and so that they're perfectly happy living in Guyana and continuing to work in our healthcare sector.
Well, it's rather disturbing to hear the Minister for Finance speaking about um, teachers, training of nurses, sorry, for export in the manner that he did, because the reason that our nurses are leaving these shores is not because they're unpatriotic. It is not because they do not like what they do. It is simply because they're not being appropriately compensated. It is also because the bargaining agents for labor in this country continue to be disrespected by the government,
Absolutely.
and they continue to impose paltry increases in salaries and wages for public servants across the board in the run up to Christmas as sort of a, I, I, I don't know, it's a measure of disrespect.
Well, what I would also say is really concerning about this is studies have shown, studies from the U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research, which we have cited in the past, have shown that when public servants are not provided with adequate compensation, their performance can lag. And so while they're building more hospitals, building more schools, if we're not going to be paying our public servants appropriately, then it is difficult, one, to understand who exactly will be staffing these new hospitals and these new schools, but two, whether we're going to be able to accomplish our development goals. It is pretty important for us to keep in mind that ultimately we are a wealthy country and we can afford to pay our professionals well. We take this opportunity to remind viewers that adjusting for prices, Guyana is the country with the 10th highest income per capita in the entire world at this point. In the entire world, gone past the United Kingdom, gone past the European Union average.
Unequally
yet-
distributed, may
Unequally distributed, but unequally distributed in part because the government doesn't want to pay public servants and other and provide other benefits across the society.
Let's shift focus a little bit here now to Gaisuko, which is slated to receive $6 billion. Now, Gaisuko is a special case. Gaisuko, the government boasts of Gaisuko attaining targets in 2023 without telling the whole story. The targets have repeatedly been reviewed downwards. And what is the national output from the Guyana Sugar Corporation at one point under the People's National Congress in government would have been the production of a single sugar factory. Now, Gaisuko gets $6 billion. When is this bailout for Gaisuko going to stop? What are the benefits of all these massive subventions to Gaisuko at this stage in our economy, when in fact we ought to be building our non-oil sectors into a productive group of assets for our country?
Absolutely. Really, the concern, I think the average sugar worker should be concerned about this. The fact that the government's boasted of, I think it's 28% increase in sugar production and sugar manufacturing.
Over what?
But that's because last year's total was an absolutely apocalyptic. I mean, 2022's total was apocalyptic, 47,000 or so tons of sugar.
One sugar factory produced 6,000 tons. What was it? 6,000 tons.
Well, 47,000 tons of sugar is roughly half of a typical year under the coalition's time in office in 2015 to 2020. So that means that the PPP is underperformed the coalition by something like 50%, which is crazy. That's the first thing. The second thing to note is that now that you've seen this increase in sugar production, it is still way below the coalition's numbers. We're talking about 60,000 tons, whereas the coalition was producing in excess of 90,000 tons. So even with a small improvement, the PVP is way, way behind the coalition. And of course, they like to say, oh, the coalition stifled the industry. But it seems to me it's pretty clear the PVP has been stifling the industry. The $6 billion that's being put towards it, we'll have to see what exactly that will be spent on. But there's concern that the money has not been spent, the monies that have been provided over the past few years, on effectively increasing output. And I would go further and to say that the evidence indicates that they have not been able to increase output at all, rather decrease output.
Gaisuko has been underperforming. Gaisuko has been taking up a lot of resources of the state, and it has not been performing. That's a fact. The energy sector also has not been performing in a manner that ought reasonably to perform, to the extent the government has had to take a decision to take certain large manufacturing sectors off grid so that the remaining
Absolutely.
consuming population can get electricity. And now this budget says that the energy sector will get almost $96 billion by itself.
Yeah.
And the gas to energy project, which falls also in the same sector,
Yeah.
but fleshed out separately, is scheduled to receive some $80 billion. What is going to happen? Is there going to be improvement in the energy production to support national production? Secondly, is there going to be some end to this gas to energy infrastructure side of the project? What is going to be the ultimate cost of this project?
Absolutely. Well, there's quite a few things to unpack there. The first is, and just throwing it right back to what the Minister for Finance originally said about the government is focused on rigorous analysis. Well, that same minister indicated that last year there was a persistent shortage of electricity generation throughout the year. And that to me is a pretty clear indication that there was not some sort of rigorous analysis. In fact, GPL put out estimates as to the production that it would require, the energy capacity it would require to ensure that Guyana met its needs and didn't have blackouts. But the government refused to listen to them and then had to scramble for generators to help to alleviate the blackout crisis. Now, what we also heard that was very concerning is that the new generators that they've brought recently, don't let me say new secondhand, that those generators will not be fully installed and operational until February. Folks, you may recall the government indicating that the generators will be here for Christmas. To the best of my knowledge, Christmas does not fall in February. Merv, I don't know if you have a different perspective.
I know I have absolutely no idea of Christmas being outside of December. But for the People's Progressive Party, their friends, favorites, and family members, Christmas appears to be every day of the week.
I'm telling you, Christmas for them and not for anybody else.
Yeah, and this budget offers several celebrations of Christmas for those special people. We have $204 billion for roads and bridges, but yet we have incomplete roads and bridges from 2023.
Indeed.
We still have evil spirits holding up the road in the cemetery. We still have situations where the road passing through the cemetery is being closed completely to vehicular traffic. We still have roads being constructed that only contribute to bottlenecks in traffic and heavy traffic buildups. So with all of this money going to public infrastructure, our prediction, Elson, appears to be spot on.
Absolutely.
This is clearly a budget that seeks to provide an abundance of money to the People's Progressive Party and their associates for a specific reason. Is that reason elections in 2024? That's a question that we have to explore a bit further, a bit deeper as we go forward.
Absolutely. We even saw on the point of roads, I believe in excess of $70 billion for community roads. one of the concerns that's been raised is that only some communities benefit from these roads, communities that support the PVP. Now, when confronted with this data, and confronted with the fact that communities that don't support the PVP traditionally only would get one road, whereas another community would get several roads.
23 at least.
It
one
was
case.
the vice president, I believe, he said at least they're getting a road or something to that effect, which is truly tragic. Those who pay attention to just the economic side of things will understand that the most efficient way to allocate your resources to build roads is not on the basis of who happens to support you, but based on what the needs are of the country and the needs are of the citizens specifically. So it seems to me that we're all losing out from that kind of an attitude from the PVP.
Sadly, too, not just the discriminatory award of contracts for roads and bridges, but also clearly either flawed designs or flawed execution of projects result in roads which are way, way, way below the desired quality and which require either repairs or complete reconstruction in record short periods of time.
Absolutely. Probably the poster road for that, or the most typical example, is the Grove Road, which has been rebuilt. Is it 3 times that road has been rebuilt? Every year it has to be rebuilt, which is to me utterly unbelievable. I recall the Minister of Works saying that the road had warped because it wasn't meant for big trucks. Now, I think everyone in Guyana except him knows that big trucks travel up and down that road, and therefore you need an appropriate road for big trucks.
Well, it's quite sad that the person in charge of works would not know that containerized traffic frequent that road, that logs
Yeah,
are
sand trucks,
are hauled down that road, sand trucks,
non-stop.
stone trucks.
Yeah,
It's I mean, I don't know where his head is, but any little child in this country can tell you that's the most busy artery for
Absolutely.
commercial traffic. So the issue here is not just the heavy expenditure on infrastructure. It comes down to the quality of the work. If you remember the Cato School, the first, I believe, $1 billion school in this country, it could not have been occupied
yeah,
for
had to be redone.
unbelievably long period of time, and it
Yeah.
had to be reconstructed virtually.
Yeah,
And now you have the school at Bamia, which was awarded to persons without a track record in construction. They claim to have had a track record in managing money, but clearly that too didn't help with the
great,
construction of that school in
a
Bamia.
great example.
But we also have a situation where a larger vote for constructing more schools without an assessment of the adequacy of the completion of contracts in the same area.
Absolutely.
And I believe that it is no secret that without oil in the 1970s, a People's National Congress government under Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham produced in excess of 70 schools in a short 10-year period, but there was no screaming to the top of the roof, and there was no hurling of insults in the National Assembly of the Parliament of Guyana, as is happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the other things we want to note is that the government spoken about the construction of low-income homes, but they're only talking about 706 low-income homes. That seems to me to be an absurd number. And we want to make it clear to Guyanese that our rent-to-own program is going to be a much larger in scale than this when we focus on ensuring that people from the lower income brackets are able to get access to housing.
Quality housing
Quality
too.
housing, quality housing.
Because when you go to certain areas and you see what is being provided for housing in this country, you wonder, how does this government see professional young people? How do they perceive professional young people? Why would you want to insult professional young people by giving them these little cooped up structures and calling them major homes?
Yes, we all recall the quote unquote chicken coop houses that were constructed. It seemed at first that like they were constructed out of zinc. We learned later on it was some sort of metal with concrete plastered over it. It was something to that effect. There was a question as to why the front step was so high you couldn't even climb up the front step. It was just it raised quite a lot of questions, I would say. But as well, what is to me remarkable is that the Minister for Finance would get up and say 706 low income homes in a country with, according to UNICEF, at least a year or so ago, 43% poverty rate. That implies to me that there's no interest whatsoever in those people who would be occupying the low income homes.
Well, the government is only concerned with optics. They put up a few buildings, they call them quality homes. We know that they're not, but they use that as a stepping stone to campaign. The interest is not in the area of the welfare or the well-being of the citizens of this country. It is only about using the resources of state in a bid to secure re-election. But the writing is on the wall. The citizens of this country have seen through the People's Progressive Party, understand clearly what their intentions are, understand that handouts are being used in a scheme that I call a vote procurement machinery. And this is what this budget appears to be, a vote procurement machinery budget. And so we have got to call it for what it is, Elson.
Well, this budget again has demonstrated a lack of a structured plan. We're seeing a lot of kind of one-off projects or ideas here, and we're not seeing the kind of tangible and I think well thought out programs you might want to see. Cash grants is unstructured cash grants is one a good example. But we also saw the government remark that there was going to be a focus on the tourism sector. I didn't hear any particularly well fleshed out plan for the tourism sector as to how we're going to improve it. Just a statement that there are more airlines coming and we're going to be building more hotels. And it seems to me that that is not anything near what you would need to develop a proper tourism sector. The government boasted of 319,000 arrivals in 2023. But as to whether the tourism sector has become a profitable engine that we would want it to be, didn't say anything to that effect. So people are coming, but are they spending their money in the tourism sector? Unfortunately, that's not so clear.
What is also not clear is what percentage of the arrivals are classified tourists, and what percentage of the arrivals are persons coming in taking up jobs in the
I
economy.
think a large share of the arrivals will be in connection with the oil and gas sector rather than people that are actually spending any money in the tourism sector.
Precisely.
And you didn't hear him say that he's pleased to announce that this percentage of those who arrive are classified tourists and so on and so forth. Again, we point out the government doesn't like to focus on data. Having already made some wild inflation predictions and inflation numbers that no one would take seriously, I would say.
What is equally true, Elson, is that there's no account of those Guyanese citizens leaving this country. Our nurses are leaving, our teachers are leaving, ordinary citizens who have relatives abroad and who have not been able to benefit from the revenues coming from the oil and gas sector, have not been able to benefit from increases in salaries and wages that give them a livable wage that allow them to improve the quality of their lives in this country, are leaving. They are leaving. And those numbers also are taken into account when these new airlines are coming, because it's not about traveling one way. So what is happening now is that Guyanese are leaving and Venezuelans are arriving. How does that impact our country? How does that impact the development of our country?
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are key questions that the government is shy about addressing. We'll see what further allocations they put towards national security. That's one area I think a lot of Guyanese are looking closely at. One thing that I noticed that was mentioned as an afterthought, and it seems to me the government thinks of it as an afterthought, is funding for small businesses. We saw just a small $300 million allocation for the Small Business Bureau and a $400 million allocation for small business grants. We've said in the past that we want to see much larger allocations in the billions of dollars for the Small Business Bureau and for small business grants. And the reason that we're saying this is we know that small businesses hire people, number one, but number two, we want to ensure that we expand the private sector in Guyana, and helping small businesses to get a start is really a critical element of that, especially as many small businesses lack access to credit. So this to me reflects again that the government has no real interest in these small businesses and just gives them an afterthought allocation.
The reality, Elson, in that area is that while the parliamentary opposition has a broad perspective on growing the formal private sector, the People's Progressive Party relies on grants to buy into that particular section of the population and keep them satisfied for electoral purposes. There is a discriminatory approach to the award of these grants. Simple cash handouts in Region 1, for example, you get reports of one household getting in excess of $500,000 and another household getting $35,000.
Yeah.
So the discriminatory approach has to do with who are perceived to be supporters of the People's Progressive Party and who are not. In a particular village on the West Coast, Demerara, people who do not have businesses benefited from $200,000 in cash grants, and people who are struggling to build small businesses were bypassed because of perceived political affiliation or support. So these grants that the People's Progressive Party are treating with, it has nothing to do with the growing and the development of the formal private sector. It has everything to do with partisan support and political base.
Well, you know, the reason that we are saying that these grants need to be large grants is because we intend for the grants actually be used to purchase equipment. Now, if your intention is not really to provide grants to actually conduct business activities, but just to provide some incentive, then you can give people a $200,000 grant because you don't really care if they can't afford to buy equipment with the $200,000 anyway. So our focus is on actually using grants to help us to develop our economy, rather than using them the way the PUP uses them, which is as a political tool. Now, of course, it's to the benefit of all Guyanese if we can develop our small businesses, if we can generate more jobs through that mechanism, and of course, if we can expand our production through having more small businesses.
And it is this kind of visionary outlook and this people-centered developmental policy that the parliamentary opposition is pursuing that will catapult the AP and UFC back into government and put the People's Progressive Party where they belong, in opposition. And so we will continue our coverage of Budget 2024, and we will take a break at this time, and hopefully the Minister for Finance will be able to wrap up before 5 hours, and we will be able to get the initial reaction to the budget from the at that time. If he goes beyond, we will be back before then. Stay tuned.